Michelle Idette Lee earned a Master of Arts in American Indian Studies from the University of Arizona in 1997, producing a thesis on the relationship between hippie spirituality and Native American traditions, based on her own participant-observer fieldwork in gatherings, sweats, and drum circles. Although she did not continue in academia after completing this degree, later publicly documented professional activity shows a long nonprofit career focused on development, communications, and international program support, including senior roles in fundraising, public relations, volunteer engagement, and organizational outreach for community-oriented and Israel-focused NGOs. Her 1997 thesis, The Evolution of the Flower Children and Their Respect for Native American People, examines hippie culture, especially Arizona rainbow hippies, as an evolving earth-based community whose spirituality centers on the belief that all life is connected, and for whom Native American wisdom is especially important because Indigenous peoples know this land most intimately. Drawing on 2 years of interviews with key hippie figures and her own lived participation, the author traces the movement from 1960s flower children to later rainbow gatherings, communes, drum circles, sweat lodges, and peyote or cannabis sacraments, arguing that these practices reflect an attempt to live more communally, ecologically, and spiritually, rather than simple escapism. She explores how hippies borrow native rituals, songs, and symbols, asking when this becomes harmful appropriation, and when it reflects genuine respect, learning, and alliance, noting that many native people both critique and welcome hippie involvement. Ultimately, she concludes that while hippies are imperfect and sometimes naive, their critique of capitalism, their efforts to rebuild extended family-style community, and their reverence for Indigenous knowledge position them as part of a necessary cultural shift toward ecological responsibility and spiritual connection in the United States. Rainbow hippies emerged as the next stage in hippie culture after the original flower children of the 1960s and 1970s. While the early hippies focused on peace, love, music, and rebellion against mainstream society, the rainbow generation of the 1980s and 1990s carried these ideas into a more spiritual and community-centered direction. They began using the term rainbow tribe to describe themselves, reflecting their belief that people of all backgrounds could come together as one family connected by peace and shared values instead of race, religion, or nationality. A key reason for this shift was a growing interest in spirituality. Unlike the earlier hippies, who often mixed politics, experimentation, and personal freedom, the rainbow hippies emphasized spiritual growth, harmony with nature, and the idea that all living things are interconnected. Their beliefs drew inspiration from a variety of traditions, including Native American teachings, Eastern religions, and general earth-based spiritual concepts. The goal was not just to drop out of society, but to create a way of life that felt sacred, intentional, and deeply connected to the earth. This renewed spiritual focus also led to a stronger commitment to ecological living. Rainbow hippies took the hippie concern for nature a step further, treating environmentalism as a spiritual duty. Living lightly on the land, practicing communal sharing, and holding gatherings in forests or natural spaces were seen as ways to honor the earth. Many participants viewed nature itself as a teacher, and time spent outdoors, especially during rainbow gatherings, was considered essential to their identity. Another defining feature of rainbow culture was the importance of storytelling. Instead of relying on books, institutions, or formal leaders, rainbow hippies passed on their values through spoken stories, shared experiences, and lessons told around campfires. This oral tradition became a central part of rainbow identity, helping new members learn the history, jokes, rituals, and guiding principles of the movement. Storytelling wasn't just entertainment, it was how the community kept its culture alive across generations. The Rainbow Family began as a loosely organized, completely non-hierarchical spiritual movement with no leaders, no formal membership, and no governing rules. Instead of relying on a structured organization, they functioned more like an extended family of people who shared similar values and chose to gather together in nature. This decentralization was intentional. Rainbow members believed that no one should have authority over anyone else, and that spiritual wisdom could come from anyone, regardless of age, background, or social status. Their philosophy was built around a few key beliefs. First was the idea that all life is interconnected, meaning humans, animals, plants, and the planet itself are part of the same whole. This belief naturally led to a strong focus on ecology and protecting the environment. The rainbows pursued earth-based spirituality, which emphasized living lightly, respecting the land, and seeing nature as sacred. They were also committed to peace and nonviolence, not just in the political sense but as a personal and spiritual practice. Radical inclusivity, welcoming anyone who came in peace, was a central part of their identity, along with the belief that everyone had a responsibility to care for the community as a whole. The way Rainbow family members made decisions reflected this philosophy. Instead of voting or appointing leaders, they used consensus, meaning the group would talk until they reached an agreement everyone could accept. This method could be slow and sometimes messy, but it reinforced their values of cooperation, equality, and listening to one another. Shared responsibilities, cooking, cleaning, caring for children, keeping the land clean, were also considered part of living in harmony with the group. Rainbow spirituality drew heavily from Native American imagery and teachings, though often in informal or symbolic ways. Many rainbows admired Indigenous values such as reverence for the land and the importance of community, and they incorporated elements like talking circles, sweat lodges, and prophecy stories into their culture. The movement was also influenced by the broader 1960s counterculture, environmental activism, and New Age ideas that blended different spiritual traditions. As a result, the Rainbow family became a kind of crossroads where old hippie ideals, modern environmental concerns, and various spiritual philosophies came together in a unique and evolving way. Rainbow gatherings are large, informal events held primarily in national forests, where thousands of people, often around 20,000, according to the thesis, come together to live in a temporary community. These gatherings began in the early 1970s as an outgrowth of the hippie movement, blending counterculture ideals with a stronger focus on spirituality and nature. They are not organized by any official group. Instead, they form organically through word of mouth, tradition, and shared cultural memory. The gatherings typically last for several weeks and are completely free to attend, with no leaders, no entrance fees, and no formal structure. One of the main goals of rainbow gatherings is to help people reconnect with nature. Participants camp in forests, cook outdoors, hold ceremonies in meadows or near rivers, and spend much of their time walking the land. This return to natural surroundings is seen as healing and grounding, a way to escape the noise, pollution, and stress of modern life. Being in nature is not just recreational for the rainbows. It is a spiritual experience that reinforces their belief that the earth itself is sacred and deserves protection. Another central purpose of the gatherings is collective healing. People come to share stories, meditate, drum, sing, and participate in group rituals that encourage emotional and spiritual renewal. These practices are meant to help individuals shed personal burdens, find a sense of belonging, and reconnect with their inner selves. The gatherings also offer an opportunity for people who feel alienated by mainstream culture to find acceptance, support, and community among others who share similar values. Finally, rainbow gatherings are designed to function as temporary autonomous communities, meaning places where people can experience a different way of living, one based on cooperation, sharing, and freedom rather than money, hierarchy, or rigid rules. Food is cooked and shared communally, decisions are made by consensus, and participants are expected to contribute in whatever ways they can. For many, the gatherings represent a glimpse of what a more harmonious society could look like. By stepping away from the pressures and expectations of mainstream life, participants can temporarily live in a world shaped by peace, mutual respect, and collective responsibility. At rainbow gatherings, a lot of the daily life centers around shared rituals and ceremonies. People form big circles to drum together, sing, and chant, often late into the night. There are also sacred fire areas where folks sit in silence or speak from the heart, and storytelling is a huge part of the culture. People pass on history, lessons, and funny road stories just by talking around the fire. Certain songs, like the ones sung in and around sweat lodges or circles, humble yourself in the sight of the earth, etc., get repeated so often that everyone eventually learns them and joins in. Another big piece is the sweat lodge and similar ceremonies. While not every rainbow gathering has a full-on traditional sweat, many have some kind of lodge or sauna space where people go to pray, sing, and symbolically cleanse themselves. Stones are heated in a fire, brought into a small enclosed lodge, and water is poured over them to create steam. Inside, people sing, pray, or sit in silence. Even when these sweats are more hippie style than strictly traditional, they're treated as spiritual events, not just a way to get warm or sweat out toxins. Food is handled in the same communal spirit. Kitchens are set up where volunteers cook and serve free meals, often called feeding the tribe. Ingredients are donated, scrounged, or brought by participants, and everyone lines up with bowls and cups to get fed. The idea is that nobody should go hungry if the group can help it. Sharing food becomes part of the ritual. It's not just eating, it's practicing generosity, trust, and taking care of each other in a very practical way. Children are considered everyone's responsibility. At many gatherings, kids are running around freely, splashing in pools or creeks, playing near the lodge, and hanging out in camp. Adults keep an eye on them collectively, so parents can join sweats, drum circles, or other ceremonies without worrying every second. The thesis describes scenes where multiple adults take turns watching groups of children, and the whole environment is set up so that kids feel safe, welcome, and included in the community's life rather than pushed aside. Music is everywhere, and it's not always planned. People show up on hilltops or in meadows with guitars, drums, flutes, or just their voices, and suddenly you've got a trench town-style jam, totally spontaneous, everyone joining in as they feel moved. Sometimes, while this is happening, a pipe gets passed with marijuana or a group shares psychedelics, but it's often framed as a spiritual sacrament rather than a party drug. The idea, for many rainbow folks, is that these substances can open the heart or mind and make people more receptive to each other and to nature, especially when used in a respectful, ceremonial setting rather than for escape or entertainment. Rainbow hippies borrow a lot from Native American traditions, especially when it comes to ceremony. At gatherings and in their home communities, they build sweat lodges, hold pipe circles, and use symbols like eagles, 4 directions, and the tribe to express their spiritual ideas. Many of their favorite songs and prayers talk directly to the earth, rocks, water, and trees, echoing ways they've seen Native people honor the land. One commonly sung chant at hippie sweats is all about humbling yourself in the sight of the earth, rocks, and water, very much in the spirit of earth-based Native teachings. A lot of this borrowing happens through direct contact. Hippies meet Native people at rainbow gatherings, on reservations, at ceremonies, or in shared activist spaces, and they pick up songs, stories, and ritual forms there. The thesis describes hippies learning sweat songs, pipe etiquette, and storytelling styles from Native friends and elders, then carrying those practices back into hippie circles. Over time, these borrowed pieces get woven into rainbow culture and are passed on orally. So a song that started in one tribal context can end up being sung in a Tucson sweat lodge or at a rainbow camp hundreds of miles away. But this relationship is complicated. There's a constant tension between deep respect and cultural appropriation. Some Native critics argue that when non-Indigenous people run sweats, wear regalia, or sell Indian spirituality, they're hollowing out something sacred and turning it into a costume or product. The thesis acknowledges that people have faked Native identities to gain access to ceremonies, for example, lying about being part Indian to get into secret ceremonies, and that this kind of behavior is clearly disrespectful and harmful. At the same time, there are plenty of examples of positive, respectful interaction. The author notes cases where Native elders explicitly welcome non-Indians into ceremonies, saying it's good that they come and learn these things, and where a white person participates fully and patiently in long, difficult rituals without disrupting them. She also describes how some Native people tell her directly that the world needs non-Indians to start understanding Indigenous views of land and spirit, if we're going to survive ecological crises. In those moments, hippies and natives are clearly allies, not opponents. There are also very real points of conflict on the ground. Native people sometimes confront hippies for dressing like Indians, using pipes or sweat lodges in ways they see as off-base, or mixing in things, like marijuana in pipestone pipes, that many tribal members consider inappropriate or sacrilegious. Some hippies get called out for acting like experts on Native traditions after only a little exposure, or for centering themselves in stories that really belong to Indigenous communities. The thesis doesn't gloss over this. It admits that hippies can be clumsy, ego-driven, or naive, even when they mean well. In the end, the author suggests that intention is a crucial ethical dividing line, but not the only one. If someone is using native practices to make money, gain status, or cosplay as more spiritual, that's a big red flag. If, instead, they're genuinely trying to honor the teachings, listening to native people, and staying open to correction, the borrowing starts to look more like respectful exchange than theft. Still, she stresses that good intentions don't automatically erase harm. Hippies have to stay humble, keep listening, and remember that Indigenous communities get the final say on what is or isn't okay with their own traditions. Rainbow hippies often talk about Native American prophecies, even though these ideas don't always come from specific tribes or documented oral traditions. One common theme they repeat is that red energy or native spiritual wisdom is now flowing through white people, as if nature is choosing new messengers. Another frequently shared story is that a white brother is supposed to return with a missing spiritual piece that helps bring people back into balance. These sayings circulate widely at rainbow gatherings and are treated as meaningful guidance about the future of humanity and the earth. For rainbow participants, these prophecies aren't seen as belonging to one tribe or nation. Instead, they interpret them in a universal, inclusive way, meaning the messages apply to everyone, not just native communities. The prophecies are folded into rainbow beliefs about unity, peace, healing the planet, and humans learning to live in harmony again. They support the idea that all people, regardless of background, have a role in protecting the earth and reconnecting with spiritual values that modern society has lost. The thesis, however, raises an important question about the authenticity of these prophecies. Some may be genuine teachings that cross cultural lines respectfully, but others might be inventions, misunderstandings, or New Age reinterpretations of native ideas. This creates a tension. Rainbow hippies see the prophecies as uplifting and unifying, while critics worry that they oversimplify or distort real Indigenous traditions. The author suggests that while these spiritual narratives can inspire positive actions, people must be careful not to treat imaginative or borrowed stories as actual native prophecy without understanding their origins. Rainbow culture is built around a really strong environmental conscience. People see the land, rocks, water, and trees as alive and worthy of respect, not just as resources to use. This shows up in songs they sing during sweats and gatherings, where they literally chant about humbling themselves in the sight of the earth, the rocks, the water, and learning what those things know. That attitude becomes a kind of everyday spirituality. You don't just walk on the land, you relate to it. Because of this, rainbow folks are big on leave no trace style behavior. Camps are supposed to be cleaned up, trash is packed out, and people try, at least in theory, to leave the forest looking as if no one was there. They see pollution, pesticides, and industrial damage as symptoms of a deeper problem, a society that's forgotten that the earth is a living system we depend on. The thesis links this to wider environmental warnings, like those about chemical contamination and threats to fertility and health, and suggests rainbow people are responding by trying to live in a more careful, earth-friendly way. Work itself becomes a spiritual act. Cooking for hundreds, digging latrines, washing dishes, hauling water, and cleaning up the site are all treated as communal responsibilities, not chores to avoid. Sharing the labor is a way of practicing love, equality, and humility. Instead of I take care of me, you take care of you. The unwritten rule is we all take care of each other and the land. This is why kitchens are shared, childcare is collective, and people are encouraged to jump in wherever help is needed. A big part of the philosophy is the feeling that America has become disconnected from the land and from extended family life. Rainbow hippies want to rebuild something that feels more like a tribe or big clan, lots of brothers and sisters, elders who tell stories, and children who grow up feeling held by a whole community, rather than just a small nuclear family. The thesis argues that this shift is part of a larger move toward a new kind of America, one that doesn't automatically exploit people, animals, or the earth as the default way of living. In terms of worldview, rainbow hippies are described as closer to primitivists than survivalists. They're not stockpiling weapons or fantasizing about outgunning everyone after the apocalypse. Instead, they're dreaming of going back to simpler, more land-based ways of living, gardens, shared land, simple shelters, low-tech, and deep spiritual connection with nature. The thesis notes that rainbow people aren't obsessed with the end of the world or the beginning of some new age, they focus on now, on living differently in the present, with good spirit, in the hope that this way of life can help heal both people and the planet. At rainbow gatherings, decisions are made through consensus, which means people talk things out until everyone can live with the final choice. There are no formal votes, no leaders making rules, and no enforcement system. This process can take a long time, but rainbow participants see it as essential because it reflects their belief that every voice matters equally. Even if a small group disagrees, the larger group keeps discussing the issue until a shared solution emerges. It's messy, but it's part of the culture's commitment to cooperation and non-hierarchical living. Although the rainbow family has no official leaders, certain people naturally become informal elders. These individuals aren't in charge, they just have years of experience, deep knowledge of the culture, or a calming presence that others respect. They often help guide discussions, settle conflicts, or explain traditions to newcomers. Their influence comes from wisdom, not authority, and they're valued for their ability to model patience, kindness, and grounded thinking. Children at gatherings are typically watched over by everyone, not just their parents. Kids roam camps, swim in creeks, join drum circles, and hang around kitchens, and adults look out for them collectively. This creates a sense of extended family, where children grow up feeling supported and safe in a large community rather than confined to a single household. Parents get breaks to join sweats or ceremonies, and kids experience a social environment that treats them as part of the tribe rather than separate or fragile. A major feature of rainbow culture is the absence of formal hierarchy. There are no bosses, police, organizers, or in-charge people at gatherings. Instead, guidance comes from spiritual insights, shared values, and mutual respect. If someone wants to start a kitchen, clear a trail, or create a meditation space, they simply do it, and others join in if they feel called. The system works because people self-organize around what feels meaningful, rather than being assigned tasks. Humility is a highly valued trait in rainbow culture. People are encouraged to stay open to learning from others, whether those others are young travelers, old storytellers, or native elders visiting the gathering. Being loud, bossy, or self-important is generally frowned upon. Instead, participants aim to approach community life with curiosity, gentleness, and a willingness to listen. This attitude helps keep gatherings peaceful despite the lack of formal structure. Finally, rainbow culture relies heavily on oral tradition to pass down its stories, practices, and values. Instead of written rules or official documents, people learn how things work by listening, often around campfires, in kitchens, or during long walks through the forest. Stories about past gatherings, funny events, lessons learned, and spiritual insights circulate constantly. This oral storytelling is what holds the culture together across generations, giving newcomers a sense of belonging and giving elders a role as keepers of memory. Rainbow travelers make up a major subculture within the rainbow family. These are people who live a mostly nomadic lifestyle, moving from place to place instead of settling down in one community. They follow rainbow gatherings, seasonal camps, spiritual events, and friendly hippie towns across the country. For many of them, the road itself becomes home, and traveling becomes a way to stay connected to nature, freedom, and the constantly shifting rainbow community. Because they move so much, rainbow travelers act as carriers of stories and traditions. They bring news from one gathering to another, teach songs they've learned, and pass along memories, lessons, and warnings. This makes them important keepers of the rainbow oral tradition. They help preserve the culture by spreading information that would otherwise get stuck in just one place. In this way, the Rainbow Road becomes more than physical travel. It becomes a journey of personal growth and spiritual exploration. Travelers also serve as bridges between local hippie groups and the bigger national gatherings. Someone living in a small town might only know a handful of local hippies, but when travelers pass through, they share stories about the wider rainbow world. They introduce people to new ideas, invite them to gatherings, and help newcomers understand what to expect. This keeps the culture connected and prevents it from becoming isolated into separate pockets. Many aspects of rainbow traveling culture are influenced by Deadhead road life. Like fans who followed the Grateful Dead from show to show, rainbow travelers build their lives around movement, music, community, and openness to chance encounters. This influence shows up in their traveling styles, their improvisational way of living, and the sense of adventure that comes with never staying in one place for long. Together, this creates a traveling culture centered on learning, sharing, and living lightly on the land. Rainbow culture has its share of controversy, especially around cultural appropriation. Some rainbow people use sweat lodges, pipes, songs, and symbols that come from native traditions, but not always with permission or proper training. There are also cases of self-proclaimed shamans who present themselves as spiritual experts after only limited exposure, or who blend bits and pieces from many tribes into something that doesn't really match any real indigenous practice. The thesis even describes people misrepresenting their own ancestry to get into native-only ceremonies, which the author clearly calls out as disrespectful and dishonest. Beyond cultural issues, rainbow gatherings also run into legal trouble. Because they take place on public land and draw thousands of people, government agencies sometimes demand permits or try to control how and where gatherings happen. Many rainbow folks see this as an attempt to regulate their freedom of assembly and spiritual practice. The gatherings have also attracted law enforcement attention. There can be surveillance, pressure, and occasional raids, especially around drugs or perceived disorder. This reinforces the feeling among some rainbow people that the system is suspicious of any large, leaderless, alternative community. Inside the culture, there are internal challenges too. The thesis points out that lots of hippies and rainbows have only a vague or romanticized idea of native traditions. They may mean well, but still get things wrong, or treat Indianness as a mystical stereotype, rather than a set of real, diverse living cultures. This naivety can lead to clumsy or offensive behavior, even when people think they're being respectful. Some outsiders and native critics are understandably frustrated when hippies act like experts on ceremonies they barely understand, or when serious traditions get mixed with casual drug use and called sacred. On top of that, external misconceptions add another layer of tension. Many mainstream observers still see rainbow hippies as dirty, lazy, drugged out, or morally loose, and lump them together with punks or other street kids they actually differ from in attitude and values. The author notes that some media and academics talk about hippies with an upturned nose, ignoring the real spiritual searching, community work, and environmental concern behind their lifestyle. So rainbow culture lives in a double bind, criticized from the outside as irresponsible, and criticized from some native and activist corners for crossing cultural lines clumsily, even as many participants are sincerely trying to build a more peaceful, earth-honoring way of life. Rainbow culture offers a living example of what ecological awareness can look like in everyday life. Instead of just talking about the environment, rainbow hippies try to practice what they preach: camping lightly on the land, avoiding toxic chemicals, sharing resources, and treating the earth as sacred rather than as property. In a world where huge parts of nature are being polluted or paved over, their lifestyle becomes a small, practical model of how people might live with less waste and more respect for the planet. A key belief in this scene is that real change starts inside each person. Rainbow folks don't think you can fix the world just by voting differently or passing a law, if people themselves don't change their hearts and habits. So they focus on personal transformation, learning to be more compassionate, less greedy, more mindful, and more connected to the land and to each other. The idea is, if enough individuals shift their consciousness and behavior, society will naturally change in that direction too. Rainbow hippies can also act as go-betweens between cultures. Many of them spend time with native communities, environmental activists, spiritual groups, and regular mainstream folks. Because they're curious and talkative, they end up carrying ideas back and forth, telling hippies more about native concerns, telling non-native people more about earth-based spirituality, and encouraging everyone to see common ground. When this is done humbly and respectfully, it can help soften stereotypes on all sides and build more understanding. At their core, rainbow ideals push peace, unity, and earth-based living. They imagine a world where people see each other as one big family, violence is rejected as a way to solve problems, and success is measured by harmony with the earth, rather than money or status. Gatherings, drum circles, shared meals, and ceremonies are all ways of rehearsing that vision, like temporary mini-worlds where those values are actually lived, not just talked about. The author ultimately argues that, despite their flaws and occasional missteps, rainbow ideals point America in a healthier direction. In a culture still driven by consumerism, isolation, and environmental damage, the rainbow emphasis on community, humility, and ecological responsibility offers a much-needed counterweight. She suggests that if more people adopted even some of these values, respect for indigenous wisdom, care for the earth, and a sense of global family, the United States could grow into a more just, sustainable, and spiritually grounded society. The following is a full-color, first-hand description of what it's like to be at a rainbow gathering, showing the food, the fires, the songs, the sweat lodges, the kids, the chaos, the beauty, the awkwardness, and the mix of hippie and native-inspired practices drawn from the author's fieldwork. You walk in the way she walks in, off a dusty forest road, past school buses and rusted vans scattered like bright beetles among the trees, into a valley that has quietly filled with thousands of people. Every year, she notes, something like 20,000 hippies gather in the national forests, setting up kitchens, camps, temples, and villages out of tarps, rope, and imagination. There is no main gate, no ticket booth, just trails worn into the grass where people and dogs and barefoot kids have already passed. The smell is wood smoke, sage, and a little pot. The sound is drums drifting in from several directions at once. The first thing that strikes her is always the kitchens. Someone has rigged up a giant tarp, pots big enough to bathe in, a rough circle of people chopping vegetables on makeshift tables. At a place like Kid Village, chosen and seated by a Yaqui rainbow named Felipe Chavez and his family at the 1993 Alabama gathering, food is served all day, thousands of meals, free, paid for in goodwill and labor. Children swing on ropes, run underfoot, and weave in and out of the kitchen fires as if they were born here. No one asks to see your money. The only question is whether you've eaten, and whether you'll take a turn stirring the pot later. As she wanders, the center of the gathering starts to take shape in smaller rings. There is always a sacred fire, a place where people sit quietly or speak when moved, and from there paths radiate, towards a calm main meadow where thousands will later hold hands to pray for peace, towards drum circles, towards silent camps. She's seen similar circles back home at the old Euclid and Adams house in Tucson, nearly 100 people drumming under the full moon, forced to stop at 10 because of angry neighbors, then reforming a smaller circle, holding hands and singing, "Consider the lilies of the fields, they toil not," until the energy feels complete. A rainbow gathering is that circle, exploded out into an entire valley. Somewhere off to one side, there will be a sweat lodge. It may be as informal as the hippie lodge at the Christmas Starland in Tucson, an adobe and wood dome beside a pool, trees shimmering overhead, everyone nude and relaxed, children splashing while elders tend the fire. A sign asks people to shower before they jump into the pool after sweating, and not to run the hose inside because the water bill got too high and it kills the mood. She lies on a towel, feels the spray from some kid's cannonball, listens to music drifting from a picnic table, and watches people slip in and out of the low dark doorway of the lodge. Inside, it's another world, hot stones, a wooden bowl of water, songs rising and falling in the dark. One favorite chant calls on people to humble yourself in the sight of the earth, the rocks, the water, to learn what they know, to lift each other up, higher and higher. It's simple, repetitive, and it gets under your skin. Then there are the hilltops. She remembers one mountaintop circle somebody jokingly called Trenchtown, where the plan had been a mellow acoustic jam, but the energy got so intense it turned into something else. People sat in a ring of stones, passed around a pipe lovingly packed with green buds, and listened as the wind and the trees seemed to make their own music. Sage and cedar smoked in the center. More and more people climbed up to join until there were 2 circles of bodies echoing 2 circles of stones, and each new arrival brought a story, a song, or a scrap of prophecy. That red energy was moving through white people now, that a white brother would return with a missing piece, that we were all part of some shift the old ones had spoken of. Nobody was quite sure where these prophecies came from, but they mattered to the people telling them. The totem pole shows up in her mind as clearly as any person. At a gathering on the Arizona land called Pongovi, she hears that 2 East Coast rainbows have hauled in a long skinny pole that has been traveling from gathering to gathering since 1980. It was carved, someone says, by a circle of rainbows near the White House years ago, and offered to 4 different presidents as a peace gift for the lawn. All 4 administrations turned it down, so now the totem pole just wanders with them like a wandering Jew. It's only 12 feet high and about 6 inches thick, a skinny totem pole, she jokes, but it's carved all over with symbols from different religions. At Pongovi, it stands in a flat field ringed by low valley walls that look like gentle cliffs, with hippies scrambling up and down them all weekend like ants, and she feels, looking at the pole, that she's seeing a literal piece of hippie history planted in the earth. Rainbow Space is full of elders and travelers. Some have spent decades on the road, following gatherings, bartering crafts, sleeping in buses and teepees. They carry stories from one place to another, and when night falls you can sit by a fire and listen to them talk about the first gathering in Colorado in 1972, when over 20,000 people came to Table Mountain, and the governor called out the National Guard, about later years, when the Forest Service spent hundreds of thousands monitoring the gatherings and trying to force them under permit rules, about caravans that drove all the way to Washington, D.C., camping across from the White House to protest new regulations on assembly. Around another fire, someone remembers a Wyoming gathering when a white buffalo shape appeared in the snow on a mountain, and people whispered about prophecy all night. None of these stories are told as jokes. Even the wildest ones are treated as valid perceptions of reality from which we can learn. Indians are there too, sometimes. She knows about Hopi elders like Grandfather David and Thomas Banyusaya, who have come to gatherings and told stories about the Pahana, the elder brother who will return with a missing piece of a rock inscription, and about how non-Hopi people turned that into a treasure hunt, showing up at the mesas claiming to have the missing stone. She's seen hippies arrive at Hopi in pants and attitude, placing their trip on all these people, and get firmly told to go home. She loves these gatherings and these people, but she also sees the awkwardness, the nakedness that feels normal on Rainbow Land and shocking on Reservation Land, the way reverence and cluelessness can mix in the same body. Everywhere she looks, it's children, work, and play all mixed together. Kids racing between camps, adults automatically reaching out a hand at the edge of a creek or pool, older teens learning how to cook for hundreds, how to haul water, how to listen to elders tell stories on clifftop land like Pongovi or under pecan and mesquite trees at the Tucson Sweat. Nobody's getting rich doing this. Most people are barely scraping by selling crafts or playing music, yet somehow there's always a pot of soup, always someone with tools, always a bus that can take you to the next place. The labor, digging latrines, washing pots, cleaning camps, is treated as part of the spiritual work, a way of saying we all take care of each other and the land. And then there are the big moments of collective focus. On the 4th of July, the main meadow fills in a slow, quiet wave. People come from all over the site, some in bright clothes, some naked, some in buckskin, some in tie-dye, some dragging their sleeping bags with them. At noon, hands link in a huge fragile ring, sometimes several rings, and for a long time there is only silence. 10,000 or more people holding a shared prayer for world peace. Journalists drop in and describe it as what the 60s felt like, but to her, it's the 90s, and it's still happening. When the silence breaks, songs rise, old hippie songs, new rainbow songs, snatches of Hebrew, Sanskrit, English, ahos and amens, none of them fully authentic to any one tradition, all of them trying to reach towards something bigger. Seen through her eyes, a rainbow gathering is beautiful, embarrassing, sacred, and messy all at once. It's a place where non-Indians sing Indian songs badly but with real feeling, where government helicopters circle above people who are mostly just trying to cook, pray, and skinny dip, where long-haired wanderers argue about prophecy and recycling, and how to keep the toilets from overflowing. It is, she thinks, both a refuge for lost souls and an experiment in another way of being American. One that wants to rebuild extended family, listen to the land, and learn, clumsily, imperfectly, from the native people who were here first.